Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not the longest serving finance minister of Germany. This was Mr. Stoltenberg, one of my predecessors. But I am the second one, and maybe Mr. Schäuble will be longer in office than I, but this will be decided next year. I have to speak about multilateralism, and you see I have together with others, founded G20 in 1999, and this is a question of interest from my position. And I will speak from a European point of view. In the end, my English is not the best one, and therefore I must read what I have written down. Free speech is very difficult for me, but later on we can discuss. At the end of the Second World War, a new world order was established. It was the order of the anti-Hitler coalition, the United Nations, the successor of the League of Nations. All nations all over the world became members, step by step, mostly of them because of decolonization. The members of a former Hitler coalition followed partly decades later. For example, Germany, western part of Germany, German Federal Republic in 1972. A Security Council as leading committee was founded. Permanent members of it became the leading nations in the anti-Hitler war: United States, United Kingdom, France, Soviet Union, and China. Each of these five, at that time, mightiest countries received a veto right. This was the political world order. Theoretically, it was nearly multilateralism, but 5 states were more equal than the others. And there was a hidden agenda behind the Charter of United Nations, and this was an American one. USA had become a global power as consequence of First World War, and they had decided to play the most important role globally. The new economic world order was represented by International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, founded in Bretton Woods in the United States in 1944. The United States and partly Western Europe were the greatest economic powers at that time. Therefore, they dominated the so-called Bretton Woods institutions, and they do it still now, but with decreasing influence. But soon after the war, the anti-Hitler coalition broke up. New military alliances came into being: the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, led by the United States, and the Warsaw Treaty Organization, led by the Soviet Union. Later in the 50s of the last century, Western Europe began to form an economic unit, the European Economic Community, later called European Union. So did eastern part of Europe and the Soviet Union. They founded the Council of Economic Cooperation, Comecon. So soon after the victory over Hitler, the world was split into 2 blocs, which both tried to get hegemony. So the United Nations were paralyzed, especially the leading powers of the 2 blocs used their veto against the other in the Security Council. But now, a 3rd bloc arose. The process of decolonization led to more and more independent states, the most important among them India. India and Yugoslavia, a communist state which successfully resisted to Soviet imperialism, became the informal leaders of the so-called Third World. This bloc was more in favor of the Soviet Union than of the former colonial powers. The hostility between the US-led bloc and the bloc led by the Soviet Union increased. It culminated in the Cuba crisis in 1962. Then, in the 70s, the German Chancellor's Willy Brandt policy, accepted by the United States, led to a relaxation between the blocs, first in Europe and then globally. The motto was peaceful coexistence. In Europe, the Organization for Security and Cooperation came into being. This organization included all European states belonging to NATO or to Warsaw Treaty Organization, the neutral ones too, and United States and Soviet Union. Their common understanding was that security in Europe only can be guaranteed as common security, not one bloc against the other. Later, as chairman of the North-South Commission of the United Nations, Willy Brandt made proposals for a peaceful and fruitful cooperation between the industrialized countries and the Third World in order to abolish hunger, poverty, illiteracy all over the world. The following 25 years were a period of stability without any real confrontation between the blocs. The situation allowed a complete change in the Soviet Union and a complete disbanding of the Warsaw Treaty Organization without any violence, without any remarkable shake of global or even regional security in Europe. It seemed that the capitalist economic system was the only remaining system and that the United States were left over as the only superpower, the world order now being a one-polar one. This was the background for new fora, G7, the organization of the economic leading countries at that time, created because of a French-German initiative. For example, Helmut Schmidt was one of the leading persons at that time in this initiative, to harmonize and stimulate the global economy, accepted Russia as a new member, now forming the G8. And acknowledging the increasing importance of the emerging markets, especially of China, for the world economy, in 1999, the G20, a dialogue forum of the finance ministers and the central bank governors of the most important developed countries and the most important emerging markets were created. This was an American-German initiative. Both fora, unspoken, accepting the United States as the leading global power, worked together, not without controversial discussions, but without conflicts. For a short time, the Security Council of the United Nations was no longer paralyzed by vetoes of one bloc against the other. After the September 11th, 2001, the global community seemed to be united against terrorism. But shortly later, US President George W. Bush decided to implement a new military doctrine that United States feel justified to start offensively war if it seems to be necessary for their national interest and national security. And then he waged war on Iraq without votum of Security Council. Both the doctrine and the Iraqi war contravened international law. They were a clear violation of the United Nations Charter. These facts created new controversies within the global community, and it was the first time that France and Germany refused to take part in a US-led coalition. On the other side, the cooperation within G20 became more and more effective, especially in fighting against the crisis of the international financial system, which had its origin in the United States, in fighting against an upcoming crisis of the global economy. All leading economies identified strong common interests. And they together were successful in preventing the global economy from falling into a deep depression, like in the end of the 1920s. For a period of more than 25 years, there was a window of opportunity to create a robust framework for cooperation between Russia and the European Union. Mikhail Gorbachev, since he came into power, permanently spoke of a common European house in which the Soviet Union had its own flat. Putin several times confirmed his vision of a common economic region between Lisbon and Vladivostok, And in Berlin 2008, he said he could imagine one day the euro being Russia's currency too. And there were discussions about a Russian membership in NATO. But this period passed without tangible results. When Russia was weak, at that period, the European Union and the United States did nothing to help and to come into a fruitful and strong cooperation with Russia. I think, especially the United States and United Kingdom were not interested in a strong cooperation between the European Union and Russia, and both were and are not interested in a really united Europe and in Europe which is not only partner of the United States but of Russia too. And Europe was divided into New Europe, which supported the Iraqi war, and Old Europe, which refused to take part in this illegal military action. During this period, there were many opportunities to come to a more durable common ground within the global community, but these chances were squandered. Where we are now? Now we are in a very unstable geopolitical situation. No doubt, the United States is the most powerful player worldwide. It is by far #1 regarding to its military power. It is influencing the financial markets quite more than any other player, and it has an enormous capacity and capability of espionage. It is regarding itself as world-leading nation. The US Congress is blocking the reform of Bretton Woods institutions, especially of the IMF, which would concede emerging markets a fair influence respecting their increasing contribution to the world economy. But China is on the way to become as powerful as the United States. It needs only a few years and its economy will be the strongest one globally. China is strengthening its military power very quickly. It tries to become independent from the US-dominated internet and the US-controlled global payment system. It creates international financial institutions parallel to the Bretton Woods institutions, for example, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the New Development Bank. China is the informal leader of the emerging markets. And it powers with big investments, especially in Asia. It means the Silk Road Initiative, and Africa, but increasingly in Latin America and in Europe too. And the other players? The European Union today is the biggest economy, stronger than the US, but nearly nobody knows. Sometimes it seems that Europe itself does not know. Europe is not really united. There is a lack of common spirit, and therefore it underperforms. Russia, after a period of weakness, is back on the international stage as a strong military power, but it failed to diversify its economy. It depends too much on export of oil and gas, and therefore its economy is vulnerable. And it's a very difficult position looking to Paris, the questions we discussed there. Decarbonization of the societies and especially of the economic process is a big danger for Russia, for example. Latin America and Africa also, they have great potential, cannot play an important role in the global politics during the next 2 or 3 decades. They need time for development and for creating a stronger framework for their continental cooperation. India in some years may surpass China as a state with the biggest population, but needs more than 2 decades to become a global player, which can negotiate with China and United States approximately on the same level. Unfortunately, the conflicts of interest between the main players seem to increase. Ukraine, Syria, Libya, the South Chinese Sea are examples. Neither the United States nor the G20 can play an important role under these circumstances. Only the fight against terrorism, against proliferation of nuclear weapons, the fight against climate change seem to be of common interest for the main players, and might be, I'm not quite sure, the fight against tax avoidance of global enterprises. Where we are going to? Different scenarios are conceivable. First scenario, United States insists on its position to be the only superpower globally, but China, supported maybe by Russia, is less and less willing to accept the globally leading role of the United States and is strengthening its own capabilities. Both sides are forging stronger alliances. The United States, for example, tries to expand NATO nearer to the borders of Russia, has close espionage cooperation with the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, and is trying hard to establish free trade zones together with the European Union and in the Pacific region, excluding especially China and Russia, and the poorer countries too. China has created the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, promotes more and more the Silk Road Initiative, and builds up a payment system by its own. Russia, for example, is establishing the Eurasian Economic Union. There's a clear competition to create zones of influence, sometimes conflicting. Nobody can predict clearly whether these conflicts became harder. We only can hope that the big players in these decisive moments have wise and strong leaders, and nationalism is not the predominant sentiment of the people. If the conflicts get out of control, the consequences for us, or for us all, will be terrible. Another outcome, a second scenario, is imaginable. United States and China are understanding that they can't win one against the other. They agree to cooperate globally, so dominating the rules and conditions of living together of us all. United States and China are economically strong linked. United States is buying quite a lot of products from China, so securing many jobs in the Chinese industry. And China, on the other side, possesses enormous dollar reserves, so mainly financing the US deficit. This would be a bipolar world, not a world order where all nations and states are cooperating on the same level. Therefore, this order can't be sustainable too, because a big majority does not possess the same rights than the mighty minority. To establish a stable, fair, and sustainable world order, a third scenario is needed. To realize it, we need more global players, approximately on the same level as China and the United States. The next to grow up into this role can be Europe. But it must be quite more united than it is today. The initiative must be at least a French-German one. A unified Europe, UK taking part or not, will be a global player not by military power, but by its economic and cultural capability and its social cohesion. Europe possesses the greatest potential of soft power, and because of its pluralistic structure, it cannot have any hegemonial ambition. And there are tendencies in Europe not to accept that the world will be divided into an American-led sphere and another led by China. A hopeful sign is that all bigger European countries are not only supporting Bretton Woods institutions, but also joining Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and are willing to cooperate with the Silk Road Initiative. But I doubt seriously whether Europe is able and willing to accept this role in the near future. Europe's unification is an example for all other regions and continents of the world. But there are remarkable mistakes made in the process of European unifications all other regions can learn from. I give some illustrations. First, you need a spirit of solidarity between nations and between governments. During a long period after the Second World War, Europe had this spirit. But in the actual refugee crisis, you can see a lack of it. Secondly, if you have a monetary union, as we do in the euro, with the euro as common currency, you have a common monetary policy. But when you have a common monetary policy, you must have a common fiscal policy, a common economic policy, and in the end, common social security systems too. That means you can't have a monetary union but sovereign states. Finally, a political union is needed too. I'm not sure whether the nations belonging to the monetary union are now willing to accept this consequence. And this is a danger for the euro. Thirdly, if you have a monetary union, this union is forever, and all governments and the central bank are obliged to clarify this fact. At the beginning of the euro crisis, the European governments, and especially the German one, failed to send this signal to the markets. Therefore, the market participants feel invited to speculate against the integrity of the Eurozone. This was a reason why this crisis became such a big one. I think now all governments have understood, and they never will repeat this mistake. Another global player in the future will be India. And strong regional or continental unions must be established in Latin America, in Africa, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia. In all these regions and continents, we can see organizations for cooperation, but till now, all too weak. There is not enough of common interest and spirit. But those unions can be of great advantage for global peace and fruitful cooperation. Due to their internal pluralistic structure, they hardly can show hegemonial tendencies. And the world order to come, hopefully, the main big players, United States, China, and India, and the regional and continental unions can solve their internal problems by themselves. And they can cooperate on the same level to answer the global challenges such as climate change, poverty, fair trade, migration. This would be a real world order of multilateralism. And this would lead to reform of the United Nations. Each of the big three and the regional and continental unions would receive a permanent seat in the Security Council. Already today, it is unacceptable that India, Africa, Latin America, Middle East, and Southeast Asia are not permanently represented by their most important member states in the Security Council. The world is quite another one than it was directly after World War II. And then, this is my personal opinion, not only our governments should represent us, the United Nations should be controlled by a parliament chosen by all citizens of this globe. There is a worldwide initiative asking for this global parliament I am belonging to. Today, this seems to be utopian, but one day it will be reality. I'm quite convinced. Only 30 years ago, who could imagine at that time the internet we now have? Who had spoken about climate change as such a serious challenge we now recognize? We together are confronted with enormous challenges we only can solve together. That is what we must do. The third scenario, the scenario of real multilateralism, is the most ambitious one because we all are responsible. We all are responsible for it. but it is the only fair and sustainable world order. And in between, we need national governments which are following the main principles of the United Nations Charter and the policy of Willy Brandt, who therefore was honored with Nobel Prize for peace. And these principles are complete renunciation of using violence to solve problems with other countries, good relations, especially with all neighbors, not the neighbors of the neighbors, with the neighbors, and preparing peace fundamentally. That means the willingness for disarmament. As citizens, we are all responsible for our governments. Thank you that you listened to me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eichel. I know, we all know that you are a very busy person, but if you don't mind, we are going to allow the audience to ask a few questions. We are going to take 2 by 2 the questions so that you can answer them. Who is interested to asking questions? Microphone here.
My name is Lidia Jimenez. I come from Barcelona. My question is regarding how you see Latin America playing a role. Latin America.
Yes.
I think for those who are Spanish, we have a clear conception about the impressive ability of Latin America to be integrated in our societies because of the cultural roots we share in common. But they have also shown that in the United States. So the power of Hispanic community is very strong. So from your presentation and for a scene about the roles, I was missing your opinion about the role of the Latin American community.
Thank you very much. Another question, perhaps, then we will turn here. Here, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask a question relating to security with an overbearance.
You did not introduce yourself to Mr. Eichel.
Okay, my name is Salani Gambule. I'm from Botswana. Earlier on, you alluded to a point about Security Council. But from a layman's point, I've seen a lot of squabbles whereby countries such as the US, China, and Russia, they don't come to decisions that affect, after all, world peace or world order. To give you an example, a couple years ago, when there was the Arab Spring, there was probably a vote to decide if the Security Council should, or the UN should take out the Assad government, which was not accepted because there was a division between the US, Europe, probably, China and Russia. Now, this led to groups such as the ISIS coming up because the government was not taken down or changed. Now, I'm saying if there's going to be a lot of this polarization in coming to decisions by the West versus China and Russia, is it not point now that the two parties come to a point to say, if there's an issue that is going to affect world peace, why don't we agree upon it? Look what's happening at the moment. That agreement was not reached, but now both parties, which is the US, Europe, and Russia, they are now bombing areas in Syria. Why couldn't they just agree from the first moment to now bomb without coalition, without cooperation? And the other point that I want to make is it not time to allow more African countries to have a fair slice of voting or veto power at the Security Council, so that maybe there is a balance of power now? Countries such as the US, in collaboration with Europe, can have a shift of power to actually gain control over China and Russia when it comes to making those decisions that relate to security issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eichel.
First, Latin America. Yes, as I said, Latin America in the future can play an important role, but at the moment you can't see, and this is for a longer period, you can't see that there is a common spirit within Latin America. This is, for example, due to American influence to Latin America. And looking, for example, to the results of the elections in Argentina, Argentina and Brazil are in contrary now and are not working together as they did in the past. And as far as Latin America is not fighting for its own role, and together all the member states of there is a regional organization for cooperation, but it doesn't function. This is a main problem. And that means, on one side, I'm not so hopeful about this, United States must accept that there is an own organization of Latin America and is not influenced, especially by United States. I think they should accept. And on the other side, Latin America must receive more common spirit, more common political, common ideas. And this is a main problem till now. And I think it needs, if we are very optimistic, it needs 2 decades to come to such a solution. And if you haven't such a regional cooperation, Latin America can't play such an important role. And this is the same, as I said, to Europe, because it's quite clear that United States and now China, maybe Russia, are not interested in a real united Europe. And it's a question for the Europeans whether they accept or not. I fear at the moment they accept. This to Latin America, and therefore I said, well, we have, in the future you will have 3 big players, United States, China, and India, in the long run. And you need continental and regional unions, all smaller countries, but together they may have the same, can play the same role as China, United States, on the same level with other instruments. I think better instruments, not military instruments. Yes, and Security Council, as I said, that's a problem. If there are such a big divergence of interests between the main players, on one side United States, on the other side Russia or China, you can't have decisions made by Security Council, although to start a war needs a decision of Security Council. Otherwise, it's illegal. This is world order, since the Second World War. And it's quite clear, you are right. There are quite a lot of regions and continents underrepresented in the United Nations till now. And this is what must be changed. But it will not be changed till the continents and the regions have their own and functioning cooperation. For example, Africa, you have the African Union, but what is its really common interest? This is a problem. And therefore, first you must unite, or not to unite, you must come to a very strong and robust cooperation between all member states of Africa, and then you can ask United Nations to reform itself and, for example, to have one seat for Africa in the Security Council. And we, for example, in Europe have to accept in the end that we only have 1 seat, not 2, the British one and the French one. And Germany does not need a seat in the Security Council. The government I belong to asked for a seat in Security Council, I didn't accept. Because we can accept that France is speaking for Europe, but and most of the others can accept too. But first you have to come to a strong cooperation in Africa, and then you can ask successfully for reform of United Nations, not earlier.
Thank you very much. Yes, we are going to take another question, but you may have noticed how unselfish of His Excellency Mr. Eichel by saying that Germany, such a big economy, does not volunteer, especially himself, does not volunteer to have a seat in the United Nations and cede to this place to France, and that will speak on behalf of the European Union. You don't find such brilliant politicians very often, so we have to congratulate him. We are going to take one more question, perhaps, if you wish. Yeah.
His Excellency, I appreciate your informative papers you are presented.
You introduce yourself.
Oh, my name is Yar Mohammad Badini. I am an editor of the Baluchistan Today newspaper from Pakistan. I appreciate your nice paper presentation, lot of information you deliver us and we taken. My question is that you point out in your presentation the Iraq war imposed. Germany not supported them. Also, the Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of the UK, also say this is the unjustified war. Wrongly we supported that. But the question is that when US imposed the war, but there is no find any atomic things there. But they create problems there. After the Iraq war, they create many terrorism still going on. What do you think about that?
About what?
About the unjustified, impose the war on Iraq without anything, not find any atomic things there.
Yeah.
They say this, this is the. My second question is that the European Union, some countries are say they broke the European Union, going to change also. UK are not in the European Union, you know, in Eurozone. Thinking many countries about that. What do you think about it?
No, please repeat if I didn't get it.
Sorry, just like UK is not in Eurozone, some other countries, just like France, recently incident, they are going to separate from the Euro. Just this thing.
First, as I said to Iraqi war, no? It was a violation of international law. I can't say more because it was a lie what United States said about the reason of Iraqi war, and later on the US Secretary of Foreign State said, Mr. Powell, declared publicly that it was a lie. It was. And this was the main reason why Germany and France refused to take part was we asked, what will be the result? You can start a war, you can win a war, but how are you winning the peace? This is the main question. And United States and the coalition of the willing didn't win the peace. This is a problem. And this is the consequence we have now. We have failed states in Iraq, we have failed state in Libya, we have a failed state more or less in Syria. Is a consequence. We have a failed state in Afghanistan, nearly. And that means that military interventions, in the end, looking to what is a consequence, are not good, are not successful. And therefore, I'm not very convinced about our taking part in the war in Syria. I'm strictly against IS, and IS, you know, is a consequence of Iraqi war. But I fear this is not the way to win the fight against IS. Because looking to the terrorists, most of the terrorists of Paris came from Paris. They were French citizens. And that means to win the war, not war, that's not the right expression, the fight against IS and against terrorism is first a question, what is your internal situation? Have you, what is the situation of your society, of your immigrants? Because the terrorists in Paris were immigrants. And second question is, I think that the question of IS, most of the victims of IS are Muslims, not guys, Muslims. That this fight is a fight which must be decided between Muslims. If Sunnis and Shiites do not come together and are able to live peacefully together, you can't change the situation. This is the main question. And we should help all, whether they are Sunnis or Shiites, which are interested in a peaceful living together. You know, on the Christian side, we had such a problem too between Catholics and Protestants in the past, longer past. And we had wars, one against the other. But we overcame this situation. And this is what must the Muslim world must do too. And looking to Syria, it's very important that the main leaders, Iran on one side and Saudi Arabia on the other side, are sitting on the same table, discussing how to solve the problem, the internal problem of Syria and of IS. But if they do not, we have no chance to solve this problem. We have only the chance to solve the problems within our societies, but not outside.
We are not going to take. I understand that we have to finish this part, and we are very grateful to Mr. Eichel for this very clear and penetrating analysis. This is how you won the reputation of being such an distinguished politician in Germany. Please join me in applauding and thanking Mr. Eichel for his brilliant explanation.
Thank you.